Today, I'm going to tell you about a box that should never have been opened. And by the end of this story, you're going to understand exactly why some family warnings should be taken seriously, no matter how ridiculous they might seem at first. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and replace all their jewelry boxes with ones that whisper back. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On a gray Tuesday afternoon in October 2019, a 24-year-old woman named Nina Rodriguez stood in her late grandmother's bedroom, surrounded by boxes and memories. Her grandmother, Maria, had passed away just 3 days earlier at the age of 89, and now Nina and her family were going through the painful process of sorting through Maria's belongings. Now, Nina had been incredibly close to her grandmother. Maria had practically raised her while Nina's parents worked long hours, and losing her felt like losing a piece of herself. So as Nina carefully went through Maria's things, every item felt precious and important. But as Nina was packing up some of Maria's jewelry and old photographs, she noticed something strange sitting alone on the top shelf of her grandmother's closet. It was this old wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, but much more weathered and worn. The wood was dark, almost black in some places, and there was this heavy, rusty latch holding it closed. And Nina had never seen this box before, which was odd because she thought she knew every inch of her grandmother's house. So Nina carefully pulled the box down from the shelf, and immediately she could tell this thing was heavy, like way heavier than you'd expect for something that size. And as she examined it more closely, she noticed there was a piece of yellowed tape stuck to the top of the box. And written on this tape, in her grandmother's shaky handwriting, were 3 simple words that made Nina's stomach drop. "Don't open it." Now, Nina just stared at this note for a long moment. I mean, this had to be some kind of joke, right? Her grandmother had always been a bit eccentric, always telling stories about old family superstitions and folk tales from back in Mexico. So Nina's first instinct was to laugh it off, like maybe this was just her grandmother's way of creating some mystery, maybe it was filled with old love letters or something embarrassing that Maria didn't want anyone to see. But at the same time, there was something about the way those words were written that didn't feel playful at all. The handwriting was shaky, yes, but it was also urgent, desperate even, like her grandmother had written this warning in a hurry, or maybe when she was scared. And Nina had never seen her grandmother scared of anything in her entire life. So Nina decided to respect her grandmother's wishes, at least for now. She took the box back to her apartment and placed it on a shelf in her bedroom, right next to some family photos. And for the first few nights after bringing the box home, everything was completely normal. Nina went about her regular routine, mourning her grandmother and trying to adjust to life without her. The box just sat there quietly on the shelf, collecting dust. But on the 4th night after bringing the box home, Nina was lying in bed around midnight when she heard something that made her blood run cold. It was a soft tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. Very slow, very deliberate, and it was coming from the direction of her shelf. Nina sat up in bed and listened carefully. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. She was just about to convince herself that she'd imagined it when she heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, she was absolutely certain it was coming from the shelf where she'd placed her grandmother's box. Now, Nina tried to rationalize what she was hearing. Maybe the building was settling. Maybe it was her upstairs neighbor moving around. Maybe it was just the sound of the old radiator kicking on. But deep down, she knew exactly where that sound was coming from, and it terrified her. The tapping continued for about 10 more minutes, and then it just stopped. Nina lay awake for the rest of the night, staring at that shelf, waiting for it to start again. But it didn't. And when morning came, Nina convinced herself that she'd just been stressed and grieving, and her mind was playing tricks on her. But the next night, the tapping started again. Only this time, it was a little bit louder, and it lasted a little bit longer. And Nina could swear that the rhythm was different, more insistent, like whatever was inside that box was getting impatient. This went on for 3 more nights. Each night, the tapping got louder and more aggressive. And on the 7th night, something happened that made Nina's blood turn to ice. She woke up around 3 a.m., not to the sound of tapping, but to the feeling that something in her room had changed. She opened her eyes and immediately looked toward the shelf where the box was supposed to be. But the box wasn't on the shelf anymore. Nina sat up and frantically scanned her room. And there, sitting at the foot of her bed, was the wooden box. The rusty latch was undone and the lid was slightly open, just a crack. And the piece of tape with her grandmother's warning was gone. Completely gone, like it had never been there at all. Nina screamed and jumped out of bed. She grabbed the box, slammed the lid shut, and locked the latch as tight as she could. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the mechanism. And then she shoved the box into her bedroom closet and slammed the door shut. But that night, the tapping didn't come from the shelf. It came from inside the closet. It was muffled, but it was definitely there. Tap, tap, tap. All night long, until Nina couldn't take it anymore and went to sleep on her couch in the living room. The next morning, Nina opened the closet door to check on the box, and what she saw made her legs give out. The box was sitting in the middle of the closet floor, several feet away from where she'd left it. And the lid was cracked open again, just slightly, just enough for something to peek out. Now Nina knew she should have left the apartment right then. She knew she should have called someone, anyone, for help. But instead, she found herself walking toward that box. Something was drawing her to it, like a magnet. And against every instinct screaming in her head, she knelt down and peered inside. What Nina saw defied all logic and reason. The inside of the box wasn't just empty, it was impossibly deep, like she was looking down into an endless black void that seemed to go on forever. The darkness inside that box was so complete, so absolute, that it seemed to absorb light rather than simply block it out. And as Nina stared into that impossible darkness, she heard something that made her soul freeze. A whisper, soft at first, but getting clearer, and it was saying 2 words that chilled her to the bone. The moment those words reached Nina's ears, the lid of the box slammed shut with such force that it sounded like a gunshot. Nina screamed and tried to scramble backward, but as she turned to run toward the door, she felt something ice cold wrap around her ankle. She looked down and saw what looked like a shadow, but it was solid. It was pulling her back toward the closet, back toward that box. Nina clawed at the floor, trying to get away, but whatever had grabbed her was impossibly strong. She never made it out of that room. The next day, Nina's co-workers called the police when she didn't show up for work and wouldn't answer her phone. When the officers broke down her apartment door, they found Nina's bedroom in complete disarray. Furniture was overturned, there were scratch marks on the floor, and Nina was nowhere to be found. But sitting quietly in the middle of the bedroom closet was an old wooden box with a rusty latch, locked tight. And taped to the top was a fresh piece of paper with a message written in Nina's handwriting: "Don't open it." The police filed Nina's disappearance as an unsolved case. The box was eventually returned to Nina's family, who placed it back in storage, respecting the warning that was now written in their daughter's own hand. And there it sits today, quietly, patiently, waiting for the next person who won't listen to a simple warning, waiting for someone else who thinks they know better than the people who came before them. Because some boxes are meant to stay closed, and some warnings should never ignore.